Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to once again welcome a very dear friend, a very senior leader, a fellow member of the YPO, an accomplished business leader, and an expert in geopolitics from Sydney, Australia, Mr. Peter Ivany. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I think that's over generous, but I do appreciate it. So thank you. Always good to be with you.
Always. Thank you. Peter is the chairman of the Ivany Investment Group. He's also the person behind the success of Hoyts, which has 450 cinemas. He's a member of the Sydney Cricket Sports Ground Trust. He's the chairman of NIDA and the chairman of Sydney Swans. And he's also the recipient of the Australian Order. So, Peter, you and I keep talking about what's happening in the world, and I always have a lot of respect for your views. Today, we're going to speak about Australia, about China, about India, the US, the Asia Pacific, and of course, a subject that you know a lot about, which is Israel. And let me ask you the first question. How do you see Australia positioning itself in today's rapidly changing geopolitical landscape?
Yeah, Australia's in a unique position because it has to be close to China, because China is 32% of its trade and by far its most significant trading partner. And it needs to be close to America for its security. But America also needs Australia because in that region, you know, they have a number of bases, they have a number of soldiers, which is a number of people even on the ground that has increased during this period. And they're trying to build up a sphere of influence in Southeast Asia and Oceania, Indo-Pacific, South China Sea. So this whole area, and Australia is a pivotal point because we share a lot of history and we share, many common sort of attributes as democracies. So Australia has to sort of walk that line between both of them. Now, what's happened in the last few weeks has been, as always, as Donald Horne said, in the 1960s, Australia is born a lucky country because Australia was relying on the UK a little bit and America a lot for AUKUS because it feels its major defence and security lies in these nuclear-powered submarines. Ultimately, they have to increase that to drones because drones is really the way you fight a war in many respects today. But they rely on that with that AUKUS agreement, so that's become an important agreement. Whether that's important for America, I'm not sure. But what is important for America is, rare minerals. And China having 93% of the world's rare minerals. Yeah. This last round of trade negotiations, they played that hand and they played it pretty well. If the amount of money, which is I think an $8-9 billion investment in Australia by America into rare minerals, all comes to fruition in the next 5 years, even if it takes 10, Australia will have 20 to 25% of the world's rare minerals. So it's important. So America has diversified their source of getting raw materials in a pretty safe way, so they can be guaranteed, because it's not only the defence, but in every aspect of life, rare minerals are a critical part of it. So that helped in the latest round of trade negotiations in South Korea. There's other countries that have raw minerals. There's Brazil, there's India, there's obviously China, there's other countries, but they feel safe, in Australia. So there's still a bit of work to get that done. There's always a number of environmental hurdles that our governments have to overcome, but they'll have to overcome it because they need help in our defence. I mean, Australia is in no position to defend itself. From the Chinese side, Australia at this stage, it's over-reliant on China. 20 years ago, it was 10% of our exports. Now it's 32%. That's a risk, as all the European countries found with Russia and oil and gas. And that is, Australia will have to stay very friendly with China. Not that China's got any sort of, sort of military type objectives in Australia that have been seen, or pretty well anywhere in the world, really, outside of Taiwan, and that's commentary. But it's really important for China, in case they don't agree on everything, that they diversify their export market. So that's going to be very pivotal.
Correct. But tell me, Pete, you mentioned that Australia has to depend economically on China because 32% of the trade is with China. and it has to depend on USA for its security. And when the number one and number two of the world economies are currently trying to tango, but when they're against each other, how does Australia balance its uh, this entire in this kind of contradiction with trying to balance two individuals or two countries which are really against one another?
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't think we've done it so well. Because under the previous Liberal government, we decided to antagonise China, which didn't hurt our exports one bit, but it did hurt certain industries because they needed iron ore and they need coal and they need natural gas.
Yeah.
But it did definitively hurt our wine industries, our shellfish, other industries that couldn't replace the markets quick enough. But it wasn't a volume, but to the individuals affected, it was a big impact, into those industries. This government's done the opposite. It's gone back to be very friendly with China. So all of those trade barriers were lifted on Australia from China. But then Trump didn't speak to our Prime Minister for 9 months. And there was just no chorus. Every other leader had gone to Washington and we hadn't. So there was just no sort of, there was just no relationship. And that could have meant that AUKUS, which is what we're pretty well putting our whole defence things, all chips are on black.
Correct.
That would put that in doubt, because it would be very easy for America to say, well, we haven't got enough nuclear submarines ourselves. And this is, outside of drones, this is the biggest area of defence for most countries, these nuclear submarines. That outside of this, we'll need them ourselves, because one thing for sure is happening with all this trade disputes and that are going on around the world, that people are increasing their defence spending. And if you look at, I think the way Trump sees this is a big chessboard of trade and economics versus defence, which actually means that a lot of the old trade and relationship pacts are really sort of become more marginal. So we've had two governments that have managed it in different ways. This government's obviously having a good week because of rare earths. So on that boundary, which it's hard to manage your way around that conflict. At the moment, we're in good shape with both. The other point that's really important for China is if Europe and America, because China's really replaced Europe's dominance in the world. I mean, they've gone from 20-odd% of the economies to 36%. And a lot of that's, probably half of that's come at the decline of Europe, and the rest has come Latin America and a combination of other countries. But America at the same time has increased its percentage of the world economy. So between America and Europe, you've still got 55% of the world's economy. So China couldn't be as strong unless it has economic relationships with both Europe and America.
Correct.
And if America continue getting closer to Europe, which I think will happen with looking at the different governments that have come in, their reliance on defence, what Russia's doing in the Ukraine. So China, at this point in their development, cannot rely just on their own market, because their GDP per head is far lower than the United States. It's second to the United States. It's about 2/3 of the United States, but they've got a lot of people. And there's not enough in the other countries, particularly because Japan's an ally of the United States, and in a way, so is South Korea, and they're the two biggest economies, and putting India to another side, who also is playing both sides against each other.
Correct.
And so look, the world's in a complete flux.
Absolutely.
And then on top of all of this, you've got Donald Trump, and and we'll get into that, but he's sort of omnipresent in all of this.
Correct.
And even though all these brilliant pundits from the media think that Xi has got Trump's number because he's a longer term player and he's not in a democracy and he won't be re-elected, I wouldn't sell Trump short on the way he's playing this world game at the moment.
I agree with you. I agree. But we're going to come to India and some of the other countries. One more question relating to Australia. Is that what is Australia doing to diversify its economic and trade partnerships? And what is your view that, given the amount of attention that is being given by Trump to domestic politics, do you think he will take his eyes off Asia Pacific?
They're two very good questions, and I have to answer them separately. So the first question is, Australia is starting with its European pact with the UK it is starting to try to diversify. But at this stage, you know, they did a deal with Papua New Guinea, but that's not economic. That's more defending. I mean, if you look at the islands around us, about 10 million people, and 9 million of those people live in Papua New Guinea. So that's a defensive thing more than economic. So we will have to do more things in Europe, and obviously the rare earth things in America is good for us. But we will, and you know, we continue to increase our trade with India, but it's a very small base, but big potential. Correct. And we're continuing to increase our trade and tourism and immigration from India and South Korea. And Japan's always been a strong economic partner. But we have a long way to go, and it's really early days. And this government's in its second term. And if anything, our reliance on China hasn't changed. In fact, it's probably got more. So the proof there is they're starting to do these deals and starting to create new trade relationships. But we can't see the results of those yet.
Yeah.
Domestic politics in America. So that's more a question about the politics in America, and it's really where Trump gets his power from. Trump gets his power from the traditional base of the Republicans, from the evangelicals, and then from the MAGA group. Now, if you go to the far right of America, they really want to be more isolationist. But the other two groups are not as isolationists. So even though you get people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and all these people that are, and other people that are jumping to the extreme right, that's only one part of Trump's, supporter base. Okay. And he's now doing deals. In his own words, he's solved 8 wars and you get the 9th one done, say, before Christmas. But that really depends on other things which we'll explore today between how China and America work out where Russia sits, because Russia is overplaying its hand, but it's got a rare, so it can be, there's other ways of getting around that. So let's say he's got 8 of these wars sort of in his own mind, but at least stabilized. So domestically, he's not isolating America. He's getting fully involved in all of these situations. So how the domestic politics plays out beyond Trump is very much going to depend on who follows Trump. And in my opinion, there's a huge difference between Rubio and Vance.
Correct.
Right. So because they have different bases, and in a way, Trump is so dominant. And even though a lot of people don't like him and want him to be less dominant and look for fault, he's actually doing quite well.
Correct.
And that's just looking at what's happening, most people are sort of overall were in a better place than when he came in. So if you look at that, he may well be in a position where he will ordain who will follow him. And I guess, from my point of view, heavily involved in sort of, not just involved, but interested more in global politics, very involved in the Middle East. At this stage, we would want someone like Rubio because he would reflect our values, and we would hope that's what America's values are as well. So, and that's, I think, the other side of domestic politics is the Democrats, but they're pretty well non-existent. So they're not even in the equation now, irrespective of the midterms. So today, the real issue is beyond Trump, who will control domestic politics in the US. At the moment, I think we're okay.
But what I also wanted to ask you is that will domestic politics in America force Trump to re-engage or disengage from Asia Pacific? And how would that impact Australia, China, India, and all the other countries?
I don't think so. I mean, as I said, they've actually increased their personnel in Australia. I think this rare earth pact, which is really a rare earth and a defence pact, really, on both sides. And I think, and if you look at the number of bases they got throughout Asia, from Guam, Philippines, Singapore, Japan, they've got a real foothold in Asia. They can't let it go. Correct. Asia is 36% of the world's economy. So you just can't say, oh, we've had enough of Asia, we're out. And you can't say America is strong enough, even though America still has 27, 28% of the world's economy. It still needs these other markets. So I think, while irrespective of what Trump says, if you look at what he does, he'll be engaged with the whole world. And he's in a really strong position, and pretty well he controls the policy. Because most of his, as I said, the Democrats really at this stage, they're so far away that it's really about who follows Trump more than the Democrats. And I think, and if you look at the people on the far right in America, they're not going to vote Democrat. So I think he's pretty safe. And 2/3 of his constituency is not MAGA far right.
Correct.
And he's not that himself. I mean, the guy likes peace. He lives in New York. I mean, he represents those people because he thinks he can give them a better standard of living. But ideologically, I don't think he's there.
Absolutely. Let me now come to China. We have spoken to a little bit about China, but how do you interpret China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region? There's trouble with the Philippines.
Yeah.
Taiwan is a long-standing issue. Japan is busy arming itself now after a long time.
Yeah.
Vietnam and all have little uneasy kind of relationships. What is your perspective on China and in the Indo-Pacific region?
But if you look at historically, China hasn't really gone to war with many people. It's had border skirmishes, but it really hasn't done it. And the biggest issue with China over centuries is how it's split itself in two continually. And that's always potentially to happen, big country, north and south. But it is definitely expanding its economic dominance. It's expanding its supply routes. It's really taken a huge control in parts of Africa, whereby I can tell Australian governments, mining companies were sold to Chinese. It's too hard to manage. They've built some infrastructure. So they are sort of controlling their supply lines because they need those natural resources. And obviously they need dominance in these markets so they can, their goods can, run unimpeded. If you look at this trade war, America's put tariffs on and China's stopped supply. That's really, it's been trade versus supply. So you can't have access to our market. And I say, good. Well, all these things that you need to build things in America that you can't make there at the price we can make them, we're going to stop the supply. So it's sort of, and let alone what they're doing in ports. But what's happened around the world is people have found ways around it, and they've found alternative sources. They've found ways around the sanctions. They've found ways to rebrand things. I mean, if you look at Vietnam's percentage of exports to America, it's gone up quite a bit. You can't help to think that a lot of that originally came from China. But either way, trade's critical to the world. It's 50-odd%, 55% of world economies. If you add intellectual property to that, which Trump decides not to do, but it's a critical piece, you're well over 70, which they don't, there's no tariffs on American intellectual property, Apple, Amazon, the cloud.
Correct.
So I think China is trying to subtly, China plays a longer game than America. And that's why you can see Trump wants, 6 monthly and annual report. He wants to get away from quarterly reporting. And China's quite happy to have 5-year plans. There's no democracy. This guy's in as long as he's healthy. So that's a disadvantage for democracies. But I think they are steadily trying to ensure that they control their supply chains. So places like Australia are a bit vulnerable because it's easier to have more control in Australia, and they can choose the price of iron ore and coal and not have to develop it themselves because all these things take a long time. In fact, one of the advantages with rare earths is their processing capability is so high, and any other country will take a long time. So China is starting to exert its economic influence, and it's significant. It's about 2/3 of US GDP. And so, but China and America need each other for different things. They can't fully develop either of their economies without some support. One, high-tech, China needs a lot of the high-tech semiconductor stuff. It also needs the American and European market to grow its own domestic. So they need each other at the moment, but that doesn't stop China from slowly, discreetly showing how strong its military capability is growing, particularly naval. They are stabilizing their own supply lines, their own economic growth. Now, whether that leads to, taking land, to that type of thing, I'm not sure. But what it does is it does secure the future for the Chinese, that their economy can grow. And from that point of view, and if you look at Quad and you look at a lot of the other agreements that all replace things like CETO and these old agreements, they're really about defence, and they're really about just balancing China's influence. Not so much stopping it, but make sure that there's an equal balance. So, and the thing that people point to, apart from these naval exercises in Australia, the Philippines, around Singapore, is, and not so much in Japan, is Taiwan. And I've got a feeling that China's learning what's happening in the Middle East and Ukraine, and it's probably not worth the effort. But that could happen, and I doubt if Taiwan will be defended. Our good friend Royce will be upset, but I'm not sure that that's a major thing to take over countries. More maintain the influence, use its military to expand its economy. I'm not so sure it wants to take over governments, but no question, when you're talking in a place like Africa, where there's a lot of mining, not enough capital, and enormous amounts of corruption, China do pretty well to secure their own supply chain for their manufacturing. So I think it's that versus ideological sort of hegemony that they're trying to push.
Correct. Let's now move to India. A couple of questions on India, and then I want to come to AUKUS and Quad. How do you view India's growing role in global geopolitics and economics?
Well, India's just starting. I mean, they have, in some areas they've been exceptional, like the number of world CEOs that come from India, their technological piece, it's incredible. Modi's been, really a godsend for India, because India is one of those conglomerations of these different areas that there's a lot of independence in each area. And democracy in some ways for a country like India has probably held back its economic advancement. So Modi's been stronger there. And then you've got the other problem where you've got a very large minority group that's, you wouldn't call 200-300 million people a minority, but they are. So that's another factor, and that impacts regional voting patterns in India. So India in certain areas, high tech, is starting to make some real inroads, let alone its infrastructure needs a lot of work, but it's not going to do it China, which Australia would love if it did it China, because we help build those countries, because you get reliable, and we're very close to you guys. I can see it on the map behind you. So it becomes, so India never quite realizes its potential. So it's sitting around at, 3 or 4% of the world's GDP. It's very small in terms of its size, but it's got this enormous population, and a lot of them are getting out of the poverty line, a very big middle class, and their education standards are increasing. But it's a real challenge for India to realize its potential. And that really impacts its power and what it can really do. Its military, it has got, Pakistan in that sort of border skirmish gets some help from China. So India doesn't have it all its own way because of the support that Pakistan gets. It's just not enough of another country's economy for someone to sort of really to improve its level of influence. And you can sort of see that with what's happening with Russia, that India, and I know you don't like this, but they decided to take Russian oil. So if you take China and India away from Russia, that's 80% of its oil exports gone in one day. And that's the end of the Ukraine war. That'll be over. So, because that's really 35% of Russia's economy, and they really don't give anything else to the world, highly educated, and the rest of it had many Nobel Prize winners, but that's more in the past than today. So I think India is just, let's say it's got potential. It should have a bigger influence. It's got to get more industrious. It's got to get better organized. It has to start building some infrastructure. It's great that all of these things are happening middle class, and it's great to see the level of stability and growth since Modi's term. But his second term, he lost some votes, and I don't know if you do have a term beyond that, but
no, we have no restrictions on terms. So
so it's India's a case. If it stops self-destructing, it's got a wonderful administrative and legal framework, courtesy of the UK, and it just should be higher and better.
Correct. But tell me, do you see the relationship between Australia and India moving beyond rhetoric to a strong economic partnership? Or will it always be just a good potential that will exist in future?
Look, I think we'd love, number one, Indians now are our fastest growing group of migrants, right? they're not our largest group of tourists, but they're fifth, and they're growing the fastest. And so there's a huge group of Indians that live in Australia, and they will have more and more influence, as they have in America as well. English speaking, and that all helps. And we've got many trade delegations, an enormous, we send people. So there's enormous, wonderful bilateral relationship. The Quad's a good piece of that. Not that the Quad's done that much. It was really an anti-China thing in the beginning, and now it's got to get into trade, and they have many meetings, but not a lot happens. Many meetings get cancelled. Many meetings are on the end of other meetings. They're not real meetings. So, and that's Japan, that's United States. So it's a big deal for the Indo-Pacific, but that's more a defence thing, and that's being handled in other ways. We would love if India and Australia did more together, and we've got a lot of things you need, and you've got a lot of things we need, because in terms of intellectual, we'd love sort of more swapping, and particularly in the tech area, where India is really just developing at an incredible rate. But it's I think the thing that can get it going, and this is, it's only just a guess from me, is if India started to grow its infrastructure faster and needed more of Australia, then all of a sudden our trade lifts and becomes more meaningful. If India gets more infrastructure, more building, more the rest of it, India's GDP will start to grow. So look, it's grown a lot from a small base, but in terms, it's in the region. We've got the same systems. We should cooperate. We've originally based on, English traditions,
English law,
and that's British law, which is really important part of the last 300 years. And so I'm hopeful that it will be better.
I agree.
And the position I'd like is if India grew so fast that Australia couldn't supply it, and that would be a challenge for us, and that's something that we'd have to meet.
Fascinating.
But it's not that easy to jump over to Africa or South America, as many other countries have found, to get that sort of same reliability, stability of governance, legal systems that you can work with. We don't have coups here. And so we're a very reliable source. So let's hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's now move to some of the trade groupings, which is, AUKUS, Quad, and BRICS. Let me start with AUKUS. How significant is AUKUS for Australia's security and global standing?
Well, I think look, Australia really can't defend itself. We've got if somebody really, we have 27 million people, a huge coastline. Australia's the same size as the United States. So we can only do it with alliances and support from other countries. So whatever we do in defence is just a deterrent, but we need support. And the only support we can get is people that we have trade relationships with and share our values. And because if I'm looking at it from a corporate point of view, Australia's an easy takeover. It's got enormous resources, high levels of intellectual capital, and you could really do a lot more with it, And it's got a country that sort of likes its economy, but is much worried about, losing the first test next week, So that's part of our values that we all cherish. So Australia is forced to form relationships, and really it's forced to form relationships with America, because, they still have, the highest level of, defense capability by some. Yes, China's growing, but America's better. And that's another reason why Australia should be closer to Israel, because we share very like-minded sort of ways of looking at the world. And Israel is very good on counterintelligence and very good at defending itself. It's a real power beyond the Middle East. It's the 10th largest arms exporter in the world. And its defense capability is it's not in real hard hardware, it's in IP and intellectual capital. And the way to sort of defend your country is through having very large trade with people that support you, but also to have significant defense capability and deterrence and intellectual property that, numbers can't just overtake you. So, look, we've only been really attacked once, and that was with Japan as part of World War II. But that was a big deal because they're very close to the Coral Sea. They saw this as stopping Australia's supply lines, and we saw that in the Philippines when we went and visited, through America and Europe. Australia would have been completely stranded. because to export, you stop Australia exporting things and there's no country left, right?
Yeah.
Even with the fact that a lot of it's up in the cloud today, but that's not our strength. It's not a weakness, but it's not a huge strength. So we're still into basically exporting basic goods, bit of tourism, bit of education. So so therefore we need to have alliances, both economically and because economically we rely on export and trade, and defence, we can't defend the country. So we need people, and they only come to us if they want something from us. So that's why we've got to be really careful that we form the right alliances. And we have to trust China.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for them if they just sell things to us and not, but they really don't take countries over in history. But history's, yes, it's a great message for what happens in the future, but it's not a guarantee.
Well said.
So AUKUS with BRICS, obviously BRICS is important to us. I mean, Indonesia's now been included in that. You've got India, you've got China. And again, it's the same as the American-China thing. We are part of Southeast Asia. That is by far where most of our exports go, between Japan, Korea, India coming along. It's probably close to 50%. We have to maintain relationships with everyone, but it's quite weird that the people you trade with are not necessarily the ones that will defend you. So that's a little tightrope that Australia has to walk, and walk well.
Amazing. I've got time for a few more questions, and I want to move to Israel now.
Sure.
An area that you have, I mean, you're Jewish and you have put in a lot of time and effort for the Jewish community in Australia. And of course, I know the amount of work you're doing in Israel as well. From your perspective as a Jewish businessman, how do you interpret Israel's current geopolitical challenges?
It's difficult, but it's not insurmountable. I mean, the difficulty you have, if I look at geopolitics, I'm going to look at it as an ideological construct, and I will get back to Donald Trump by the time I finish this, because the way he's reorganizing the world, you can't take that out of what's happening. So the people support the Islam. If you look at the Middle East, you start from there. So if you look at the Middle East, you have Sharia, which is 10%, and Sunnis that are 90%, right? But the Brotherhood are a really strong influence in the Middle East, and they've taken a view, and they've got Qatar's money, that if we can get rid of all the Jews, whether they live in Israel or whether they live anywhere else, and you've really got to cover about 6 countries, and that's why the Iranians have now come in and infiltrated Australia as well. And a couple of those bombings they're directly responsible for, and it's pretty easy to give someone some money and give them a bit of dynamite, and they'll bomb something up, and and they won't get caught most likely, or convicted. If they do, won't be charged, and because they're just doing a job for somebody else. So if you start there, so they're trying to get control of the Middle East, and so the geopolitical problems are mainly because they have a lot of the West on side. So who do they have on side in the West? They have the far left, which looks at Jewish people. They look at this critical race theory. So in World War II, we had eugenics. Now we've got critical race theory, although you've still got eugenics a bit on the right. So critical race theory means that people haven't had the opportunity, and that's why they're not in the top positions, and everyone's been excluded, and all of that. And in fact, if you really look at it, if Ukraine were beating Russia, they'd support Russia, right? So you have that situation whereby the left, it really suits them to not like Jews. Islamic people, we knock the Jews out. There's only 16 million of them, but they're sort of coordinated, and this idea they take over the media. If they have, they've done a very poor job, because the media is not exactly pro-Israel. So that's part of this problem. So you end up, the far left are pushing their governments against Israel. In America, the far right is pushing their governments against Israel because they want racial purity, and they want this isolationist thing. They don't want to be looking after other countries, and they just want to narrow the base in so everyone looks like them, acts like them, and only them get jobs, right? So they sort of see the world. So you got this thing called this horseshoe effect, where you got the far left and the far right are coming together in the middle. And the common theme is no Jews. Israel or the world doesn't matter. It's only Israel and 5-6 countries anyway.
Yeah.
Israel and America is 80% of the world's Jews. So that's where that's coming from, and that's the basic geopolitical problem. And from Islam, they've taken a view that if we can knock the Jews out and we get the other people to take control of these countries, Israel will have no defense, and therefore we can basically take over this region. And I think in that region, it's not that hard to get everyone else to come along to say, if there's no Israel, then it's the Middle East. But actually, that's only the part of the problem, because the Middle East will still have to, then it's got to decide, well, who's really running the Middle East?
Correct.
Is it Turkey, who deserves it from the Ottoman Empire? Is it Saudi, because it's got all this oil? Qatar's sitting there in a nice position, just giving people money. The Qatari government has given $100 billion to worldwide educational and arts institutes in the main, and political things, to basically continue this ideology. So they then think that, okay, good. So now we can control the Middle East, and which of the two groups we leave that, we can't work that out. And then they've infiltrated parts of Europe where they control English boroughs, where their law sits next to English law. And if you happen to be Islamic, then you just get caught. You're in an Islamic court. And I think that's over 100 different boroughs. So bit by bit, they're taking over parts of Western Europe. And clearly they've taken over parts of America, but more where the universities and arts institutions are, to a point where they're excluding people and doing that sort of thing. So Israel's geopolitical, so that's a long answer, but it's different, because that's the geopolitical challenge. Now, by far, Israel's the strongest military, particularly with America's support in the Middle East. It's not even within question. So what's starting to happen is European political system, there's starting to be changes. I mean, Nigel Farage gets in England. That's a big change. The far right are in parts of Poland. Hungary, the far right's in. Czechoslovakia been very good on Israel. Holland was a close election, but the Liberals won. France, Macron's got one foot out the door. Italy reigns in. So there are changes in Europe, and Germany has gone to the middle and far right. So that's starting to change. So that will reduce the geopolitical challenge, as long as you get people from the centre and not too far right. So that makes Israel's job a bit easier. Number two, Israel's won this war, which makes it a little bit easier, because people have to deal with it. And you can't, it's very difficult to do a complete, export ban on Israeli goods, because you can't go to a doctor, you can't go to a school, and you can't use your iPhone. So it's very difficult. And America's got Trump, and while he's there, I think Israel can meet that challenge. Going beyond that, you got a whole lot of different sort of situations. Now, the other piece of this is it's getting funded by Iran and Qatar. So Qatar is sitting on this beautiful fence now that has got to jump off, because they've done this. Who knows what Trump has done? But obviously, between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, there's a movement, and that's America's biggest base is in Qatar, so it's a big deal. And Russia has been marginalised in Syria and Iraq, where they had institutions. Now, Iran is interesting, because 93% of it's basically an oil country, even though it's got a lot of other things, but they don't export them. So China is 93% of Iran's oil. If that changed as part of this dynamic with Trump and thing, and Iran gets marginalised, that's probably the only chance you get that the mullahs disappear. The other chance you get, and this is a new theory, is that Saudi Arabia pays off the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, said, we'll give you X dollars to get rid of the mullahs, right? Now, if Iran goes, a lot of the problems in that region sort of semi-disappear. If Qatar starts sitting on the fence or going more towards the American way, all of a sudden the Middle East has a pathway to form some sort of success, which doesn't mean Hamas won't leave Gaza. But it means they'll be very much weakened. And it'll take them a longer time. So we're in a shift there. And but you need, particularly the progressive left in the West, you need America to stay strong. You need some other regions in the Middle East to start trying to form an accord with Israel. And you need Europe to go a little bit more to the right. and all of a sudden you look at those geopolitical situations slightly differently. And maybe that's overly optimistic, but we're in the middle of that, and we'll see where it ends up.
Absolutely. And on that note, Pete, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been. I mean, I've always had a lot of respect for the incredible manner in which you are able to pull together so many different thoughts from so many different countries. And today in our conversation, you really pulled together the thoughts across the whole world. We talked economics, we talked regional groupings, we talked countries, we talked security, and we talked about all the major countries in the world as well. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thanks very much, Ashutosh. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.